I broke 2 of Karen's bones when I ran her over, because she tried to stop me from saving a life. I worked in an ER for 6 years, so I'm full of stories, but when it comes to entitled people, this one sticks out in my memory. Every person who's worked in the ER knows that Mondays are the busiest days of the week and also when all the crazies come out. This day was no different. I worked as a nurse in triage, where you initially get assessed in the front before going to the back. Here we determine who needs to go back first and who can wait. We had a few stretchers in the front for people who needed to be monitored a little closer or needed IVs, blood draws, labs. There were 6 stretchers, but this day was so busy that all 6 of them were filled, plus 5 more were in the hallway. So this one lady comes in on an ambulance, but because her symptoms didn't indicate an emergency, she was put in stretcher triage to wait her turn. She was in a lot of pain. After assessment, I recognized her symptoms as being caused from gallstones. Painful, but in this case not life-threatening. We put her on a stretcher, started an IV, drew labs, and hooked her up to the monitor just in case. A few minutes later, her daughter comes in the front door. One look at her and I knew she had caused problems. She had everything from the shoes to the haircut. A classic rich Karen. When she saw that her mum was still in the front and hadn't seen a doctor yet, she started screaming that she knew the CEO of the hospital and we'd all be fired if we didn't get her mum back to see a doctor right now. We explained that her mum has a history of gallstones and even the patient herself was saying that she's had this pain many times because of the gallstones. We explained about being really busy and that there were no rooms available in the back and we'd get to her as soon as we could. She eventually calmed down, but she was still antsy. About an hour later, and another patient came in and was put in the stretcher besides the patient and her entitled Karen daughter. This patient had worrying complaints, but on initial assessment we couldn't find anything wrong. Now, as a nurse, you learn to always trust your gut. When your gut sounds an alarm, you listen. Something about this patient was setting off my alarm bells, but all his vitals were normal and I had no solid evidence to declare him an emergency. I hooked him up to the monitor and kept a very close eye on him. I let the charge nurse know of my concerns and she said to let her know as soon as something changed. Not even 5 minutes later, something changed. Now, at this time, I could explain that this hospital was a level 1 trauma center, meaning we get all the bad cases from car crashes to gunshot victims. Since we had to be ready for any traumas or life-threatening injuries, we had a room with 3 beds that was closed off from the rest of the beds because traumas usually involved a lot of people and a lot of blood. Even on busy days like this one, those rooms were empty unless there was a trauma patient. Now, back to this new patient. I was taking the vital signs of gallstone lady when I looked over to the new guy. I noticed a worrying change in his heart rhythm and stopped with gallstones to start assessing the new guy to see what was going on. This did not sit well with entitled daughter. She actually grabbed my arm and told me to finish with her mum. I jerked my arm free and said I had to make sure the critical patient was okay. As I turned around to critical patient, his rhythm went into VFib, or a life-threatening rhythm. With VFib, you literally have less than a minute for life-saving interventions. I called the charge nurse to inform her of critical patient's condition, all while unhooking him from the monitor and throwing his bed into drive. As I started pushing him back into the trauma room, the Karen actually jumps in front of the stretcher and stops it. She was screaming that her mum was here first and needed to be seen before the critical guy, and screaming that I was a liar and that she was going to get me fired. I'm usually a mildly tempered person, but knowing that this guy was literally seconds from dying, I said to the young Karen, "You have a choice. Get out of my way or get run over," as I started pushing the stretcher forward. Now, I'm really good at pushing stretchers fast and getting the patients where they need to go in a hurry, which is one of the reasons I was part of the trauma team. She tried to stand firm, but then she saw that I wasn't going to stop and jumped out of the way just as I was an inch from hitting her. Unfortunately, she didn't move fast enough, and I ended up running over her foot, which I found out later broke 2 bones. At this point, I didn't care and got the patient back to the trauma room, leaving her screaming on the floor. We spent about 30 minutes on this guy, but he ended up dying. By the time I got back up to the front, this patient and her entitled daughter had been taken to the back to see a doctor, but my charge nurse warned me that they were filing a complaint against me. A few days later, the actual CEO of the hospital came to visit me on my next shift. He was known to be a kind and fair man. Since this happened during a time before cameras were put in the ERs, he had to take what happened from word of mouth. Apparently, Karen said that I assaulted her several times and put her mum's life in danger by not assessing her properly, and that I should be fired. It turns out her mum did have gallstones and nothing else. I calmly explained exactly what happened and that Karen's actions might have ended up with the critical patient dying because of the delay she caused with her actions. When I got to the part of what I said to the daughter and running over her foot, the CEO actually started laughing and then tried to cover his mouth to hide his laughter. He explained that this lady was a friend of his sister and he knows what kind of person she is. Not only did I not get fired, he put a personal note in my file praising my actions. On my next review, I got a large raise and a bonus thanks to the CEO's note. As a side note, the hospital gives an award twice a year to 2 employees that exhibit excellent skills in their profession. In my review, they informed me I won this award because of the CEO's note. It came with a $500 bonus. A lot of people have wondered why this lady wasn't charged with a crime. I'm not sure. It happened 20 years ago and I was 22. So I didn't know anything about legal options. I just went on with my day and didn't think of turning her in. We found out later from the autopsy that the critical patient had an abdominal aortic aneurysm, which has a very high mortality rate, and probably would have died no matter what we or the daughter did. You know what? I think working on this channel is having an effect on my empathy for a certain type of person, because I actively fist-pumped when I read about the daughter's foot getting crushed under the wheel. I guess once someone is labeled as a Karen, it automatically removes a part of their humanity and my sympathy for them. That unfortunate loss of my innocence aside, honestly this might be the greatest physical consequence ever meted out on this sort of person that I've read about in my time making these videos. She absolutely deserved something for standing in the way of a patient in critical condition, and while I'm sure she didn't quite understand what was going on fully, lady, this is a hospital. You have to let the nurses and doctors do their job. Lives are at stake all the time, and your mum's gallstones aren't going anywhere. The fact that the author's boss reacted the way he did about it suggests that this kind of behavior was pretty common in Karen. And in their limited time together, she had been enough of a pain in his butt that hearing about her being actually crippled and presumably having to be put in a cast made him burst out laughing at her. If that's how people who know you react when you break bones, either you have the world's worst friends, or you might be the world's worst one. Well, rest in peace, critical patient, and author, you did do the right thing. Sell me alcohol illegally. I was working in a small chain corner store about a 5-minute walk away from my house. I don't live in an unsafe area per se, but it's not really the kind of place you could leave your bike out in front of your house either. Basically, people will steal, and the people who smoke green herb don't even try to hide it despite the illegality of it. So I got to see a whole lot of not-so-nice people, including a regular who we'll call the entitled woman. This woman would just come in to buy cans of alcohol and scratch cards. Once she even called me and my manager the C-word because we wouldn't let her in past closing time. What did she want to buy that one time? Tobacco. That's it, just some tobacco. She was becoming so threatening that my manager had no choice but to let her in and serve her. My manager at the time was a tiny woman, and I was just an anxiety-ridden 19-year-old. I have no doubt that she would have waited for us to come out and then done something incredibly violent. Entitled woman was unhinged. But this was a different story. On Sundays, we weren't allowed to sell any booze after 10 due to the limitations on the license the store held. Every other day was fine, just not Sunday. I'm from the UK, by the way, and it's pretty much the same across the board for all shops. Not only would I have faced charges, but that silly woman would never have been able to pop in to get another bottle of wine again. But yeah, we'd never had a problem with this other than some people rolling their eyes, but I never had any arguments. Until one evening at around 10:45 p.m., the entitled woman comes in and tries to buy a bottle of wine. I told her that we couldn't serve alcohol, expecting her just to sigh and put it back, but oh no. She was adamant that I'd just made this rule up out of the blue to spite her. She said, I've bought alcohol from here at this time before. Other people serve me. Obviously, I was a little shocked at this point, but I went on to reiterate why. I explained the alcohol rules, but she still argues. Apparently, she does buy alcohol this late on Sundays all the time. And this is a lie, I always work Sunday evenings and I've never served her that late. She started to get livid and demanded that I call the manager. I do just that, and of course my manager says the same thing. At this point, we have a line, and I'm getting angry. The store closes in 15 minutes and I still have to do a quick clean and we have to count the cash in the tills, but this woman is holding up everything. I said, I can't serve you the alcohol. If I scan it through the till, then it will be saved on our system that I sold it illegally. I could get fined, fired, and it'd be on my record for the rest of my life. Oh, fine. I'll leave the money here and you can scan it through in the morning. I have enough money. My manager and I are just gobsmacked. She really thought that she could just bypass the law like that? It was honestly ridiculous. Luckily, it didn't take long for her to get the memo and leave, but she did leave in a huff. She didn't shout or scream, but I did hear her mutter, "For frick's sake," as she left. I just can't believe the entitlement of this woman. I was only 19 at the time and she wanted me to risk my job and get a criminal record just so she could have a bloody bottle of wine? She even came in the next day when I wasn't working and never apologized to my manager about the horrible way she acted. And yes, it was definitely safer for my manager to just try and get her to leave. If she had called the cops and started something dramatic, I feel like this woman would have gone out of her way to find out where we live. I'm so glad I don't work in that place anymore. The author and the narrator have a vastly different opinion on what constitutes a safe neighborhood. If the local store has regulars who are willing to hunt you down and exact vengeance on you for not being able to get their bottle of hooch, I'm not sure that you live in a safe neighborhood, but maybe that's just me. To call this lady a jerk feels a little mild if you're scared for your health while you're dealing with her. You're definitely not in the wrong for not wanting to get a massive mark on your permanent record for the rest of your life. Being a scared teen in a job full of rough sorts earns you my sympathy. So, all in all, probably a good thing that you got out of that job in the long run. And I don't envy any of your managers in having to be in charge of it when people like this lady came in. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, linked below. Also, go to amithejerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. I won't come into your store anymore, but no one else will either. A couple of years back, I brought my wife flowers for Valentine's Day from a national florist that had affiliate shops all throughout the country. So the flowers get delivered and they look like complete garbage. The arrangement was smaller than advertised, and the flowers were a few days from fresh and they were wilting. Now, in my opinion, it's Valentine's Day, the one day a year a florist needs to be on point. So I called the closest florist shop that was affiliated with the national one to complain. I wanted either a replacement arrangement or a refund so I could go elsewhere to get decent-looking flowers for my wife. The grocery store honestly would have been better. When I called to complain, the person who answered the phone was very rude right from the jump. I have to assume it was a crazy busy day for her, and my arrangement wasn't the only one that had issues. The woman became very defensive, as if the flowers were a part of her soul, and I was personally attacking it. I asked to speak to the manager, and she replied, "I'm the owner." We continued to argue for the next couple of minutes, and when I threatened to stop payment on my credit card, she said, "All right, I'm going to refund you the money, but you're never allowed to step into my store again," and hung up on me. All right, witch, I got you. So I spent the next few hours on the phone with a national florist, bouncing all over the country from call center to call center, moving one rung up the ladder of their corporate structure at a time, until I get about 4 steps from the top and someone gives me a boost, and I got the actual number of the CEO of the national florist. I spent about 20 minutes on hold after speaking to the secretary and briefly explaining my situation. I tell the CEO what happens and he couldn't have been nicer. I told him I had ordered from different national florist stores from many different states in the past and was generally satisfied. And I felt like the local shop in no way represents the national florist brand, and they should lose their affiliation. He didn't immediately respond to the request, but said he'd investigate the situation, and in the meantime, send me some flowers from a different florist locally within the national florist brand. I received those flowers from a florist an hour away within 2 hours, and they looked amazing. Better than I could have asked for. About 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. And the letter apologized profusely and thanked me for bringing this to their attention. Apparently they keep tapes of the calls made to the florists, they reviewed the tapes, and agreed that the local florist didn't represent how the national florist wants to treat its customers, and the local florist will no longer be a part of the national florist brand. He gave me a $250 gift card to buy from any national florist store. Within 2 years, that local florist closed because it couldn't support being an independent florist in this suburb, when there was already another florist under the National Florist brand. So, sure, lady, I won't step foot in your store again, but neither will anyone else. So, am I the jerk? Well, as much as I bemoan the loss of small independent businesses, it doesn't sound like this local shop was doing much to help themselves out. The fact that you wanted to speak to the manager is making my alarm bells ring after so many Karen stories, but honestly it sounds like, unlike the many grim tales we do hear, you had a valid complaint and you're at least capable of empathizing that the bad state of your bouquet might have been down to her intense business at that time of year. You tried giving them the benefit of the doubt and they didn't deal with it well. Also, the owner's warning to never step foot in the shop again is a bit darn funny, given that she'd have no means to recognize you after the phone call. Hopefully, the florist found her true calling, because it's clear that it lay neither in customer service nor floral arrangements. Oh, you're close with the boss? Well, I am too. Sometime between 2000 and 2002, my dad and a friend of his started a company. They put in the grueling and overwhelming amount of work necessary to have it grow exponentially over the last 20 years. A couple of years ago, they had an opening for a technical editor, and my dad offered me the position. I'd just like to say that I'm so unbelievably grateful for this, and I always will be, and I'm very mindful of the fact that I have to tread lightly sometimes. Every year during the holiday season, they, like most businesses, throw a holiday party. They have several around the country, so every office has one, but the main one is where corporate is headquartered. The first year I attended the party, nobody knew who I was. I tend to not share who I'm related to for obvious reasons, unless somebody asks. It's not a secret by any means, but it's not something I shout from the rooftops. Anyways, the bar opened an hour before the party technically started, and since it's an open bar, a few people were already quite a few drinks in. I went up to get a drink, and somebody who I've never met before introduced himself to me in a pretty rude and arrogant way. I'm talking, "You probably know who I am, but if you don't, you should. I'm Howard." He was clearly pretty hammered, but it's a party and I didn't blame him for that. I shook his hand and tried to walk away, but he wouldn't stop talking about how important he was to the company. I smiled and nodded and oh'd and awed for a while, even as he spilled his drinks on me from gesturing wildly. Eventually he told me, "I'm also really close to the president." This interested me quite a bit because that was my dad and I'd literally never heard this person's name before. Not a problem though, because I didn't know all his friends, but he kept going on, and here's how that conversation went. "Yeah, you could pretty much call us all family friends, I suppose." "Oh really? You know his family?" "Oh yes, of course. We've all gotten together a few times. His kids love me." "Wow, that's pretty cool." I wasn't planning on saying anything because he was drunk and it didn't really matter to me. However, then he turns and says, "Okay, well, I have more interesting people to talk to now," and walked away. I was livid. First of all, you spilt your crappy, dirty martinis all over me, so I smelled like olives. Then you were kind of a jerk from the get-go, and you wasted 30 minutes bragging about yourself, and then you tell me I'm uninteresting. Right. So I waited until the perfect moment when the party had started to taper off a bit. Our homebody Howard was still there, even more drunk than he was before. He eventually made his way over to my dad and mum, chatting them up and whatnot. I sidle over to the group and he gives me the stink eye, probably thinking I'm trying to cozy up to them too. The look of horror on his face when my dad hugs and kisses me on the cheek and says, "Hey honey, your brother's coming to pick us up, do you need a ride?" was indescribable. It was a combination of, "I think I just crapped my pants," and "I'm going to yeet myself out of this window immediately." It was genuinely one of the best small revenges of my life. In case anyone wonders, he and I laugh about the incident now, and it's not a big deal. It's a funny story that I like to tell. Howard ended up reaching out and apologizing a few weeks later. I give him huge props for it because I'm sure it was difficult to swallow his pride. That last part is interesting to the narrator. Strange that his ego grew so damn exponentially when he was drinking, but he was capable of reaching out personally to say sorry, when to be honest, most people would have just hidden away or denied. So good for Howard. I wonder what his drunk logic was at the party. Faking a connection to his colleague until he made it? Strange. Well, Howie, you were an honorary jerk for one night, but you made it out clean on the other side. Hopefully that side of you is just a boozy thing and not your real personality emerging. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to check out some great music, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.